Today, I'm delighted to welcome Anna Tavis from NYU and co-author of the Digital Coaching Revolution, back to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Hi, Anna. Welcome back to the show. We were just reminiscing that I think the last time we recorded a podcast together, we did it in person in a studio in New York, but that was before the pandemic. And now, like most other podcasts, I guess we record it digitally via Riverside. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners, and also your various things that you do, and the journey that led you to where you are today as well, please?
Thank you so much, David. I'm delighted. I am a devoted listener to the podcast. I learned so much from all of your guests and yourself, your commentary. So I'm really honored to be here. So I'm going to start from the end. Right now, I am the chair of Human Capital Management Department at New York University, overseeing 4 master's degrees in Human Capital Management, and it's all Master of Science, as well as 5 various certificates. So we are really in the upskilling, reskilling, and elevating the skill level of HR to the next generation HR. We're really looking toward building that bench of future HR leaders. And that is a real challenge, David, as you can imagine, as organizations are trying to figure out what kinds of skills they need to train their employees on to stay relevant. In education, because we're kind of a little bit further removed from the actual workplace, although most of our students are working professionals, we have to be looking around the corners and trying to understand what that next generation HR might look like. So lots of challenges. Just a couple of background facts, which I think might be relevant here. So I did spend quite a bit of my career, 15 years, working for technology companies as well as on Wall Street. So well familiar with, those types of very dynamic environments, both in the United States and in Europe. Learned a lot from that practical experience. And then I bounced back into professional learning, professional teaching in academia. So that is giving me a lot of also insight into the kinds of challenges that we now face in transitioning people from pure learning to actually being effective in the job. So that's my challenge, and I really enjoy doing what I'm doing today.
Great. Well, and you've kindly invited me along a couple of times to with your class at NYU, and as part of the HR Analytics Meetup group, which Jeremy Shapiro and Stella Lupashaw organised, and we were there just in September. I think we were talking about AI and the impact that's having on HR and people analytics, which leads us nicely to what we're going to be talking about for most of today. So in March 2024, you published this very, very good book, brilliant book, The Digital Coaching Revolution, together with Woody Woodward, highlighting the critical transition from traditional executive coaching, for the few, I guess, to democratize digital coaching for the many. Why is this shift so critical into today's workplace?
First of all, thank you so much, David, again, for being an frequent guest to our NYU events, because we really serve the greater New York City community, which is huge. As you know, the meetup that Stella Lupashaw and Jeremy Shapiro run was one of the first in the world to promote people analytics. So digital coaching, it really is a lot more than about coaching. As you mentioned, when we were looking at the coaching field, it traditionally was reserved for a small elite and really provided at times to high potentials. It's high potentials elite, and therefore I think the attention that it needed to receive from the L&D, broader L&D community, as well as HR, was very, very limited because of the access issues, the costs, the availability of the coaches, etc. So there was scarcity in the coaching market. However, with the turn toward much more democratized workplace, and I think it does connect to the big ideological shift that most of your guests talk about, but more from the point of view of employee experience and how important it is to, attend to the entire population. And we've moved away from, if you recall, the war for talent, the kind of focus on high potential and leaders only. So that is where I think democratizing coaching has become more of a focus, and clearly that was not available to us if we were going to scale exclusively human skills. If we were to rely on the small cohort of coaches who are actually often very highly paid for their retainer engagements, we would never be able to serve the entirety of the employee population. So therefore, first, enter digital platforms. Starting in 2013, BetterUp was one of the first, followed by Ezra, Coach Hub, and now Valence. And we're looking at the maturity curve of the coaching evolving from a very exclusive elitist development tool to a highly democratized, accessible, affordable options for companies to be really investing in and focusing in, especially now at the time when we need to transform skills. Upskilling, reskilling, retooling organization requires tremendous agility and speed, which is not available if we start funneling people into the same traditional classes. So I think coaching has been transformed into a go-to, the most accelerated, the most personalized way of achieving the goals of broader workforce planning and transformation, of getting your employees to the level of skill that they require in a most personalized way. And just one more thing I want to say here, organizational coaching enabled through digital technologies and AI is actually lagging behind of what we've seen happening in, let's say, elite sports that started introducing these tools and these types of coaching technologies from the very junior level when athletes are just beginning to get trained in particular sports. And obviously by the time they reach the Olympic level performance, that's where you get an incredible level of digitization and technology involved, along with the top-notch human coaches, as well as it is also behind but catching up what's now becoming known as personalized medicine, where data and advice and some basic level coaching is beginning to, on the health issues, well-being, et cetera, is beginning to get delivered to individuals at their time, at their pace. So we are catching up to that level of personalization in organizations. That's what caught our attention. And when we started digging, we started, looking at how we can bring these companies together to be discussing what's the future of digital coaching in organizations. And at NYU, we created Coaching and Technology Summit, when we invite technologists, industry leaders, heads of coaching in organizations, as well as individual coaches, to have this broader, neutral conversation about what's the future of digital coaching in companies, in organizations at large, and hence, the book. This is just the beginning.
And let's focus on the organisation. So thanks, Anna. That's a great explanation. Kind of positions, I think, digital coaching and then the conversation that we can have moving forward. How are you seeing organizations approach digital coaching, this new type of accelerated learning, you could call it?
So I would say, David, first, cautiously. Organizations are obviously looking at these tools, but like everything else, they're looking at, the pioneers, the front runners, the most courageous ones out there. And there are some who I would say dove head down and embrace these tools. So it usually starts with the pilots. But first of all, let me just introduce something here. A huge accelerator for the introduction of these tools was the pandemic, when people were distributed, removed into their kitchens and other types of, home offices that were a necessity at the time of the pandemic. Organizations started to think and reflect about how to provide the support that employees needed in all of those locations. And that's where digital platforms came about. They were still used primarily with the life coaches, where coaches were using Zoom to connect for a certain amount of booked time, and companies started to add digital coaching as a part of their benefit offering. So to support employees, mental health, other types of issues, etc. So that's where it started. But it continued to evolve even in those organizations that initially engaged at the purely like survival level, so to say. Now they're rethinking and pivoting to a more strategic applications. To give you an example, so from meeting their coaches on Zoom face-to-face, just facilitated through digital platforms, we now are seeing the emergence and growth of pure AI coaches with no human interactions at all. And that's gaining momentum. This is where we see a huge opportunity for scalability. It's mostly conversational AI, but for example, the company that is exclusively and natively AI coaching is Valence, whereas the more traditional ones, not traditional, they are also all introducing AI agents and coaches, but they started out from platforms and still have an army of live coaches that you can connect to, like BetterUp and Ezra, etc. But Valence, for example, they jumped into the pool of coaching platforms exclusively with their AI coach, Nadia, that can speak 80 languages, is scalable across the globe, basically available 24/7. It's a conversational AI. You do not need to type. You do not need to type the text. It talks to you, and obviously there's a lot of learning that's built into that platform. The AI gets to know who you are, your issues. It also takes care of scheduling, follow-up, touch base meetings, etc. So everything is within that particular AI service that is being provided. And just to give you an example of another company that started small, Delta Airlines, and then now they commit having run a very successful pilot. They have now engaged, Valence to provide services for the entirety of their organizations. And if you think about organization, and if you think about a very, very distributed workforce where you have employees in the front lines of airline working in different hubs, working in different airports, from baggage handlers to check-in agents, etc. Now all of them have access to an AI coach that helps, maybe not in a most sophisticated way, but at least can address quite a few baseline issues that normally those employees do not have access to.
Yeah. No, really good. Yeah, as you said, that in the past they just wouldn't have had access to that sort of resource, would they? Based on the research that Woody and you did for the book, and maybe your ongoing conversations that you've had since, Anna, is there a certain demographics, personalities, job functions, etc., that prefer or benefit more from either human or digital coaching, and should all, how can organizations take this into consideration when implementing, I guess, face to face and digital, or human coaching and digital coaching into their organizations?
That's such a good question, David. First of all, the demographic that is most resistant is the life coaches. The life coaches are
Funny that.
really, really cautious about what it's going to do to their livelihood, understandably. And I think our goal is to really communicate and educate coaches that a coach with a bot is much more effective than a coach without a bot. And
it's an and, not an or.
exactly. Yeah. So, how the way I want to address this question, David, on quite a few of your podcasts, you talked about psychological safety and how important it is. It kind of was frontlined in the conversations about organizational culture, et cetera. We've done a ton of research on that. And so what's fascinating to me is to see how that psychological safety is developing in the context of communicating with a coach or communicating with an AI coach. What we're finding overwhelmingly, the communication with an AI coach is much more psychologically safe than communicating to your manager, let's say. Or sharing, some concerns you might have or gaps in your own skills, because we still have quite a bit of hierarchy in our organizations. Doesn't matter how much we invest in making our organizations safe or how much training our managers go through to be good coaches to their employees. There's still, at the end of the day, the performance management cycle where they need to assess you. They need to, assign you to a certain, box, for better or worse. Whether those boxes exist or not, there's still a hierarchy, and then you get either promoted or demoted or laid off, and your managers determine your compensation levels, your bonuses. All of that creates an environment where there's never a full psychological safety for sharing with your manager. However, with AI, we find that people are a lot more relaxed, a lot more safe in getting answers for, sometimes most basic questions that they will hesitate to ask of their manager or even their coworkers. So that's one question. I do think that, at least at the basic level, you can create a lot more psychological safety, providing employees with those levels of coaching. The other thing that we are finding is, and there are some experiments running across different organizations where, for example, Generation Z coming out from underserved communities. For example, in New York City public school districts, in certain areas, there's one college counselor per 500 students, which is just an impossible job, as we know. So what we are finding that those kids, as we call them, are much more comfortable, having that in their pockets, the coach whom they can ask questions, get basic advice, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the younger generation, as well as the most senior people, who oftentimes find themselves with a different set of vulnerabilities at the top of the organization. We talk about being lonely at the top. Clearly, they can have access to a human coach, but comparing a human coach with a digital coach, we always assume that you get your top level executive coach who will be totally in sync with how you feel, who you are, et cetera, et cetera. There are just as many not particularly very good coaches with whom you do not have the synergy that you need to be getting the service, the advice that you need. And I myself, in my previous roles as the head of global talent for Fortune 50 companies, I've seen those derailed coaching engagements over and over again. So I do think that even though it might not be 100%, but the level of adoption from these companies that I mentioned, and they are huge companies, Coca-Cola, Delta, um, VML, lots of companies, Experian, I can name multiple who are experimenting with these tools. They are finding a significant level of adoption, and in fact, there's playfulness and gamification in adopting those tools in organizations.
I'm guessing again one of the other advantages will be the timing. You can be in the moment. I really need some help with this, and the digital coach is going to be more readily available than the human coach because you might have a session book for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows, even longer. So that in the moment availability, I guess, is going to be helpful for people. Doesn't
Yeah.
irrespective of whatever role or level they are in an organization.
Yeah, I really like the expression, to not only have a coach just in time, but also have a coach just in case.
Yes. Yeah.
So that you feel a lot more secure that anytime you can turn to your nod down, whatever the names are, Aaron, or, it's interesting how companies are coming out with those names, and have an answer ready. And it's obviously up to you whether you take it or not. But that's the same case with the live human coaches.
It's probably a whole separate episode we could write around the psychology of having to name these human names. But anyway, we won't get into that
But
now.
it's really interesting, David. Just a footnote here that the majority prefer female names.
Interesting.
It's really interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Kind of on the kind of so think if you like we get a lot of HR leaders listening to this, and obviously a lot of HR leaders, particularly learning leaders, and executive development. I guess they're responsible for coaching within the organization. What advice would you give to those people listening who want to integrate digital coaching tools effectively into their organization? You mentioned, for example, Delta did a pilot first. I mean, is that one of the tips that you would give, I guess?
Yeah, I think most companies are starting small, and looking. The majority start with, let's say, middle management levels, because these tools really, and we have to be totally transparent. There's a long way until we develop a top level executive coach who will be fully automated. We still are going to be bringing human coaches to senior executives. However, the middle management, if you think about it, David, again, multiple conversations that you've had with your guests, the role of the middle manager is so critical for organizations. At the same time, it is really poorly designed that we expect managers to be both sort of coaches to their teams and deliver and execute on their own goals and represent management, etc. So there's an implicit conflict in the design of the management role. And so imagine having to separate out and the ability for that middle manager to bring in support so that at least the basic level of management of coaching could be outsourced to these digital coaches. And a good example for that could be in a performance management process. Like one of the challenges and tensions in performance management in organizations is it about development or is it about assessment? If employees, and the way companies started to address it is scheduling more frequent check-ins with the manager, right? 4 times minimum, et cetera, and they put the systems in, et cetera, et cetera. But even 4 times, once a quarter, everyone will tell you, with the rate of change that's happening now, it's totally insufficient. And so imagine that you have that 24/7, day in and day out, including weekends, coach available to you to be honing in on your skills, to be asking questions, even basic questions around company policies or the company's strategy, because these AI coaches, and we can talk about how they are positioned in a secure and private way, but most of these coaches are trained on the values in the documentation, all of the data available in that particular company. So they're going to be able to say what the company's strategy, overall strategy is, and help you make that connection just in time. And then when you're ready for your conversation, your quarterly conversation with the manager, you come in prepared, you have all the data, as well as the manager is prepared and have all the data on your performance as needed. And imagine kind of the level of the conversation that occurs when they finally meet face to face and as a human to human, where you can actually spend quality time taking your conversation to the next level.
And what are some of the, again, based on your research, you've mentioned some companies that are kind of doing this, and they're obviously big companies like Coca-Cola and Delta. What are some of the common challenges or obstacles that occur when they're trying to implement digital coaching, and how do they overcome those?
Yes, excellent question. Obviously, top priority for all of these companies is security of data, and privacy. So therefore, most of the top vendors, and I've mentioned a few, BetterUp, Ezra, Coach Hub, Valence, Torch, and a few others. It's very important to work with your vendor to ensure what kind of protocols your company requires. It goes through a lot of clearance, the same as any HRS system or any other system that you might want to bring in. So that privacy is behind the firewall of the particular organization. At the same time, it has the benefit of being trained on, again, the strategy, the values, the policies, et cetera, of your organization. So your coach will be speaking in the voice of any manager who's well familiar with the organization. So that is the first obstacle to overcome, and that will happen with establishing a transparency and trust with the coaching vendor that the company decides to bring in. So that's number one. And then number two, I would think, again, around data, that, how are the data that are collected across all of the coaching sessions going to be used? Who is going to see what kinds of conversations are happening? So ensuring that only in the aggregated way, and I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we can talk about it, David, in taking those data that are coming out of the conversations with the coaches in a consistent way. So those data are protected, that they're not identifiable to a specific conversation that happens in this organization. So it's no different than if you're doing a survey or any other data mining in organizations where they couldn't be identified to a specific person.
But at the kind of aggregate level, you can kind of understand the main themes, maybe at different levels in the company, perhaps different, middle managers versus senior managers. What are the common themes that they need help from a coach? Because I guess that supports potentially your learning and development strategy that you might deploy to that type of employee within the organization as well.
And that's such a great insight, David, because in my view, if organizations are going to be embracing this kind of ubiquitous coaching, they can replace surveys. Just think, we spend so much time and money and effort on a survey that runs once a year, and you get the same. In fact, yesterday I had a really great conversation with Austin Smith from VML, the big global ad agency, and he's introducing digital coaching into his organization, and that's one of the goals that are being set for these particular coaching data, because of the people are no longer getting enough from the employee surveys. They're not frequent enough. They're pretty standardized. And there's not, again, just in time mining of data on employee sentiment. And I know companies, I mean, there's, as you know, lots of, in people analytics space, lots of conversations about how to do sentiment analysis in a more effective way. So I think that these coaching engagements and coaching data, especially if you see it used by all employees at different levels, even in the performance management process, that's going to give us an incredible amount of visibility into just-in-time trends.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that was going to be my next question, actually, related to that. Certainly another listening channel. Because obviously we see many organizations, they might still have an annual survey, but they might be doing more frequent pulses, all the way down to Microsoft doing, one every day to 2,500 employees within the organization. And obviously there are other listening channels, such as looking at, looking at communication data, obviously not content, but looking at data around, the network analysis that we've spoken around in the past. This could be another listening channel, I guess. And to that point, probably a wider question, how do you see these tools potentially transforming the way organizations gather and interpret employee feedback? And obviously we know that the key thing about employee feedback is you can have all the insights, but how do you drive action as well?
Yeah. Honestly, I do not think that organizations will have a choice not to do it, because of the speed of change, especially now with the AI coming in, and the need to reskill, upskill, and accelerate learning in organizations. We all, I think, agree that the traditional training approach is so outdated and so inefficient, and becomes a complete waste of resources in the company. So I do think that this is an opportunity for every organization to accelerate the process of learning. And the only way to do it is personalize it. The only way to personalize it is to have somebody, kind of being in an apprenticeship to this coach, who can help you on a daily basis. I think we're going to see that a rate of upskilling coming up, at a greater velocity than anything we've seen before. Because one of the challenges of any learning, and I'm in the learning profession, is the lack of personalization. Because yes, we can identify with all the data that are available to us right now. We can say, absolutely, we know what the gaps are, we know where we need to take our people, et cetera, et cetera. What we did not have is the way to get them there faster. And that is, these digital tools are providing the how to the what and the why of workforce transformation that needs to happen and is happening now.
Yeah, it's almost, again, I'm literally thinking on my feet here, even though I'm sitting down. You have that conversation with a digital coach, and depending on the conversation, the digital coach is able to serve up potential learning for the person that they're speaking to. So, for example, it may emerge from a conversation that person probably needs help in improving their storytelling skills. For example, maybe they're struggling to have traction with senior leaders. They're going to them with insights, just thinking from people analytics, they're going to a senior leader with insights, but that senior leader for some reason isn't taking action on that. And maybe maybe as that conversation comes out, the digital coach is able to kind of interpret, okay, this is probably a bit of a storytelling, and it can serve up maybe some training for that person. Because
Absolutely.
if it's got access to all the tools that companies got from a learning perspective, and it could do that perhaps.
Oh, absolutely. It does do it. And then not only does it give you links to, obviously recommended, channels, videos, research, etc. And again, what becomes really critical is how you could query, this particular coach. It learns from you. It remembers your previous conversations. It checks in on whether you've made any progress, and the best part of it is it doesn't scold you. It really is just always there to support, always positive. Any time of day and night. I have a coach I'm using Nadia now for myself, just to make sure that I know what it's all about, and it's absolutely incredible. Although I do have to say that sometimes it gets annoying, but you can turn it off. You can turn it off. You have a lot of autonomy and control of how you interact with your coach, and they learn from your preferences.
Yes, very good. We talked about this privacy. The first thing that I thought about this was, okay, I've got a digital coach. What's happening with the data from that conversation that I'm having? And you touched on that a little bit, a few minutes ago. How, again, maybe you can talk to some of the organizations that are actually deployed this already. How can organizations navigate data privacy and security while getting those insights? So we talked about aggregations being part of that, but in more general terms, how have you seen organizations navigate this data privacy and security piece, and then obviously communicate that to employees?
Yes, I know. I think communication is really critical before you even launch any pilots, and it all comes with, making sure that you have the right kind of agreements with the vendor, because just like with the survey, David, it's not going to be a surprise to you that the data stays with the vendor, and what the client gets are the trends. You could see what are the themes that are coming up consistently in the conversations, like in this division, right? Or for Delta, what are we seeing on top of mind questions, and that again the same gate agents are asking consistently, and that's where organization can react and see. So it really is a relationship with a vendor where you trust them to deliver to you in an aggregated way trends and opportunities that they see coming out of the data. That's the only way I see it working, and protecting the privacy of the employees and the privacy of the conversations. And the vendors are really prepared for that, because I mean that's the number one concern that they're hearing from all of the companies they're engaging with.
And then obviously there's a lot. I mean, again, part of the human capital management courses that you do at NYU, I know there's a big emphasis on technology and analytics as well. So, what you're teaching your students there is very much at the cutting edge of where we are with HR and technology at the moment. So, bringing that maybe into the conversation, how do you see some of these AI and digital tools transforming how we work in the next? I can ask you because you're an academic. I can ask you about the next decade. If I ask practitioners about the next decade,
I
they're like,
have to be
"Oh,
thinking about
you
it,
have to think
right?
about the next decade." So, yeah, how do you see that? How do you see transforming work over the next decade?
Yeah, I think, I do think that there's a lot of conversations about replacement of people in jobs. And I think what's missing out in that equation is how much we can do to help humans stay ahead of technology innovation, and that is only going to do if we to happen if we invest in accelerating learning for employees, because these tools, David, are not just about learning new things, adjusting to the new mode of work, etc. They're also change agents. They're helping people manage psychologically the change that is happening, because I think even strategic workforce planning, what is underrated is the level of anxiety and fear in the majority of people about this change. So imagine that you have a coach that not only helps you learn a new skill, but also helps you manage your, psychological relationship with work that is, seems to be so tenuous, and your job is on the line. So it not only gives you the skills advice, but also prepares you for conversations with a manager, your career planning, your political savvy, in a sense. You mentioned storytelling with data, preparing for presentations to the senior management, to the board, etc., where it gives you feedback. There are incredible tools that help you just feel a lot more in control of the process than just thinking that you learn another coding language and that's going to get you to the next job. No, it helps holistically people to transition. And I think that we need to pay attention to that, that people can learn, but as you know, if they're in fear, if they're concerned, they become very protective, defensive, and that stalls their learning. So you have to create the environment that is conducive to learning, and that comes with a sense of control, support, growth, and the companies that are strategic about their next generation workforce are investing in supporting their employees in that way.
You mentioned strategic workforce planning there, Anna. So I'm going to move now to the question of the series. So this is a question that we're asking every guest in this series of the Digital HR Leaders podcast. How do you leverage people analytics to inform strategic workforce planning?
I want to take it back, David, to digital coaching, because people analytics really underlies all of these new tools, new methods of learning and doing strategic workforce planning. So I think strategic workforce planning needs to graduate from thinking about jobs and kind of like rigid definitions of you move from this job to the next, to this kind of dynamic, agile, skills-based learning. And strategic workforce planning kind of, again, traditionally was talking about from point A to point B as if there is a final destination. We need to think about it as a dynamic process which involves learning. And I think we will not be, and obviously I'm very biased, we will not be able to accomplish, as you know, a lot of organizations are struggling with that, this dynamic transition without introducing new ways of upskilling, reskilling, the how of workforce planning. So to me, digital coaching and making these types of support systems available to every employee is a part of the solution to the strategic workforce planning down the road. How do we keep this ongoing as an ongoing process? And I want to repeat this that I said in the very beginning. It's from just in time to just in case, because there's so much uncertainty around the corner, and there's always going to be the next generation skill set that we will need to train people on. So I think giving, arming strategic workforce planning with the army of digital coaches is going to help organizations support their employees, not just from their planning, but also from employee empowerment through the process to be successful.
Very good. Well, I can't believe, Anna, we've already got to the end of our conversation. I'm going to ask you two questions to close, because we didn't actually cover this. Number one, please, can you give an overview of what you and Woody cover in the digital coaching book for those listeners that would like to find out more? It's available on Kogan Page, by the way. You better get it on Amazon, in whichever country you're in. And also, can you let listeners know how they can stay in touch with you and follow you on social media and find out more about your work as well?
Thanks so much, David, again for the opportunity. As far as the book is concerned, what you're going to find there is more of a historical perspective, how executive coaching evolved and where it's going. You're also going to find chapters on what's happening in sports and how sports has served as a sort of a template of where we're going in organizations, as well as health and well-being. That kind of, those are the three trends that we tracked. And you're also going to see specific case studies of companies that successfully implemented those tools and their challenges and opportunities and what they discovered. So it's a very practical book. And if you have any questions, because again, this was a snapshot in time, and we've already developed the technology so much further. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm at NYU, easy to find, but I do post regularly on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to expand the network of people interested in these particular tools.
Great. Well, Anna, thank you very much for the second time for being a guest on the Digital HR Leaders podcast. I look forward to seeing you in person at some point in the coming months.
In New York, David, we want you back in New York.
Oh, well, I definitely will be. I will be definitely back in New York.
You're very popular here, especially among NYU students.
Well, I look forward to be back in New York then. I think I'm going to be there in March, actually. We've got an Insight 222 peer meeting on I think it's the 4th and 5th of March, but don't quote me on that. So,
I hope to see you.
Okay.
Hope to see you back.
You take care, Anna. Speak to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.